take us through the New Brunswick experiment. Thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Rob. Thank you.
It.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So, as Rob said, I'm going to be introducing the case study at New Brunswick with Monica Ward. I'll jump into the detail in a second, and after we finish that, Monica's actually going to join, just as some preamble, she's going to actually join the panel. We thought it would be a good idea, so she's not joining the panel. Okay, that's news. I didn't realise that. Thank you for telling me that. So she's not joining the panel. So we'll try and do, the reason why I was saying that, Q&A. So in terms of Q&A, we were going to roll that into the panel, but we'll now we'll put some time at the end for some Q&A for Monica. Monica will be hanging around afterwards, as will I, and we can take any other questions then, because we do have quite a lot of content for you. Now, I'm not going to speak to all the content, but we will share the deck with anybody who would like to see the deck. And so some of the content you'll get to see afterwards, and we actually deliberately put more content in so that we could do that afterwards. So without any further discussion, so this is what we're talking about, a deep dive into the New Brunswick Internal Services Agency and its further evolution. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I actually suggested we do this because being in the US, listening to the US Federal Government challenges, being in shared services, I've been in shared services now for 25 years. I've worked with the federal government and public sector in the UK as well, and in Canada and other locations. Many of the challenges that I'm hearing discussed, like for example the partnership meeting yesterday and at many of these events, have been experienced before, both in the private sector and in the public sector. And the Government of New Brunswick, there's so much about their story, not all of it, but there's so much about their story that I experienced with Monica and the rest of the team there that is definitely relevant to many of the conversations that are happening right now in the US. And that's why we thought it would be a really good story. So with that, why is it not paging down? I'll do it from here. Okay, so briefly, Chazey Partners, thank you very much, Rob, for the intro. It was founded in 2006. The name, I was just saying to Rob, the name Chazey actually comes from the name of the road I lived in when I formed the company 11 years ago above my garage in Reading, in England, hence the funny accent. I live in California now, though, and we actually, as you can see here, we have offices on the West Coast, on the East Coast in Virginia, and we spend a lot of time in DC. We're going to be opening office here in DC as well. Canada, I spent a lot of time on Latin America on aeroplanes, UK and Asia. Half my time is spent on aeroplanes. So that's our background. Some of our clients, just very quickly, we've got some public sector experience. We work with the university systems, UC Davis, UC San Francisco, National University Island Galway is another one, Claremont, Iowa State, we've done a lot of work with them. We work with the Program Support Center, the Department of Health and Human Services. We've worked with a bunch of public sector organizations in that space, including, of course, the Government of New Brunswick. Then we've got a bunch of private sector organizations. And many of the lessons from the private sector can be appropriately applied. You can't force them on anybody, appropriately applied in the government, in federal government as well. So hopefully we'll bring some of that to this. All right, so now the case study itself. 4 sections, overview, how we actually implemented, and I say we, the GNB team, and supported by Chazey. The lessons learned, of which we have quite a few here. I'm not going to go through them all in detail. Again, they're in the content. I'll touch on 1 or 2 just to get a flavour for that. And then, what did we actually achieve? Because at the end of the day, you actually have to achieve something, and we'll talk briefly about that. So with that, I'm going to ask Monica just to briefly talk about the background to New Brunswick, a couple of slides on that, and then I'll jump in on the project. Introduce yourself as well first. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Really excited to be here. I've never been to DC. I got off the flight last night and the heat hit me. I thought, is this DC in February? I'm coming down. So thank you. As Phil said, we worked together many years ago. Back in 2009, Chazey came to New Brunswick to talk to us about shared services. I was part of the original team, which was called the Internal Services Alignment Team, looking at bringing shared services to the Government of New Brunswick. I'm really excited. I'm still 7 years later in the shared services spectra. I'm the Director of Payroll and Benefits Services, responsible for paying about 60,000 employees, including our pensioners. So I am glad to be here, and I'm really will be quite encourage you to ask questions. So a little bit about New Brunswick. We are a small Canadian province, bordered with Maine. One of the maritime provinces. The population is just shy of 750,000. I think this slide was done. We've had a recent survey that we're just down from that. We have about a budget of $8 billion and roughly 46,000 employees, and that includes Part 1 of government, the departments and agencies, school districts, and healthcare. MBISA was mandated in 2008. It was after 2005 there was an initiative by the then government to bring together a common service review, and like a lot of things didn't get the traction. But in 2008 we had a change in leadership. We had a clerk at the head of the civil service that was really quite enamored with shared services, saw the value, and took us forward. So with really a flagship implementation, we'd gone across Canada to see what everybody had done, and we were going to be a little bit different. Did you change that, or was that me? Oh, there, okay. So just to tell you a little bit about the journey we've been on, 1972, the first Department of Government Services, it was just broadly to bring services to government, and then it morphed into 1998. There was the creation of Service New Brunswick, which was a Crown corporation forward-facing to the citizen about one-stop shopping. So it was all about being able to come into one office, get what you needed, whether it was to pay your property taxes, get your motor vehicle renewed, and it was a one-stop shop, and service centers were created. In 2008, again, government was looking at shared services. Facilicore New Brunswick was formed, and they were to provide shared services to the health services centers, so to the two hospital corporations that we have. And then in 2010, the New Brunswick Internal Services Agency, was created. And what was different about us is that we had legislation. And so it was mandated that departments receive their services from us, and I know that Phil is going to talk about that shortly. The first four services that we deployed were IT, payroll benefits, accounts payable, and we also did print, but a lot of these back office services. In 2015, again, a new government, a change in direction. Can't have all these small little, we're not big enough to everybody have their own shared services, mandated again to bring together into a new agency called Service New Brunswick. Although we had used the old name, it was made up of three entities: Facilicore, MBISA, and the former Service New Brunswick. So where we are now is we, in the last year, have moved over the remaining IT services as well as the HR. So we now are doing more the hire to retire component of shared services. So that's everything from the common recruitment right through to when we folks pension out.
Okay.
Okay, I'll turn it back to Phil.
So Monica's going to talk a little bit about later on about the journey again, since this ticker's got the arrows the wrong way around. The journey since the MBISA. So back to MBISA. So as Monica said, back in 2008, the Government of New Brunswick mandated to implement shared services. Important word there, mandated. Okay? Didn't mean there was support, but it was mandated. There was an extreme amount of opposition to that decision. But as Monica mentioned, there was a senior civil servant, clerk to Executive Council, Dave Ferguson, who really passionately wanted to implement this. And I first met the GNB team, Andrea Seymour and Louise Lemon, at the March 2009 Shared Services event in Orlando. I'll never forget that, because I said something that I don't remember saying, and then Andrea grabbed me at the coffee and said, "You didn't really mean that, did you?" And I said, "What was that, Andrea?" She said, "You didn't really mean you can implement shared services in 6 months, did you?" I said, "Did I say that? Okay, let's have a chat about it." And then she dragged over Louise Lemon, who was the Deputy Minister, and made me explain to Louise what I actually meant. So this is the first time I met Louise and Andrea. And from then we joined the journey. So from 2009 to 2012, we, Chazey, myself, were very actively involved with the team. And actually, Monica and I were reminiscing last night about some of the pain points and the moments of, including the weather, to be fair, and pain points and strife, but also the major breakthroughs we made during that period. It was a fantastic journey we had. And again, many of the things I'm hearing in the conversations here, we had those conversations. Yes, the scale's not the same, right? As Monica mentioned, the size of the province. But many of the challenges were the same. And we'll talk about those now. In addition to the challenge of the budget squeeze, the financial budget squeeze, there were other challenges in New Brunswick. There was the demographics. They had a workforce that was retiring, and they were thinking about how to replace that. They wanted to implement that technology. The technology was very old, very decentralized, very non-standard processes, multiple technology platforms. Again, haven't you heard some of all that stuff? So some of these were the drivers for implementing this new model. Okay, as Monica mentioned, there was a review done across 21 functions. There's a lot of them there. Look at all that stuff. You've got finance, administration, HR, and a bunch of information management stuff. So there was a sort of grading decision made on which ones were going to go first, and it ended up being, long story short, payroll and benefits, accounts payable, IT service desk, and IT operations. Just wanted to add that. And print, which Monica mentioned, it was really 5. Print was sort of done as a sort of side project, but it was still a big deal. So it was really 5. That's what we did, but just keep that in mind because we'll come back to that slide later. All right, so how do we do this thing then? So in terms of the project implementation, it was end-to-end. Business case, planning design, technology, deployment, and optimization. The whole shebang, as I call it. Start soup to nuts. And I remember when we first started, you know, because Dave Ferguson and others were so passionate about implementing this, which is fantastic, when I first started, I said, where's your business case? Oh, we don't really need one. I said, really? You don't really need a business case? Why is that? Because we've made the decision to go. We've got the mandate, we're off. I said, do me a favor, and I had a number of conversations with Dave and Andrea. I said, do me a favor, let's at least have a swag at one, please. Let's at least try and have a go at doing a high-level business case in terms of the financials. Okay, so we did one. And then, guess what happened in September 2010? The government changed. It went from liberal, you'll correct me if I get these terminologies wrong, liberal to Tory or conservative, right? And the Conservative government came in, and it's classic with a change of government, they were saying things like, and I'm paraphrasing, but that shared services thing doesn't work, we're going to roll it back. So one of the big things we did was we built on the business case and showed them it had been successful. And long story short, they bought it and they moved on, and that helped. And there's been another change of government, as Monica was telling me last evening, where the Liberals are back in, and this is pushed on and on and on again. So just, again, very important context. So let's get into some of the detail. The business case, we use this thing called an activity-based analysis. I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but it really was a fundamental backbone to the whole thing, where we'd gone across the whole province, or actually the GNB team had done this, gone across the whole province and worked out who did what where for end-to-end processes. So for example, the partnership meeting yesterday, we took those end-to-end processes that Adam was talking about, that was done here by GNB as an ABA activity across government. And not just the part that was going to go live, all of government. It was a big deal. Big piece of work, but very foundational. Okay, then we had, of course, we had a steering committee. And then we had a bunch of other stuff that went on from change management. We had the Deputy Minister Steering Committee, which I actually attended a number of times. We had the Shared Services Advisory Council, which was made up of assistant deputy ministers, some deputy ministers, and a bunch of other civil servants and business process owners. It was a really broad group. The Council of Change Agents. I could talk about 2 hours on what they did and how important they were, but I won't. But they were in there. Then we had a number of forums and groups, project boards. It was a fundamental framework of communication and change management. Brilliant, honestly, really good. The only caveat, and I say this to Andy, we joke about these things years down the track. At one point, after about 8 months, I said, we need to stop collaborating now and actually do something. Is important. And that's not the only client company I've said that, because collaborating is great, but if you don't actually implement anything, you give the ammunition to everybody who doesn't want to do it, who says you never were going to do anything, you don't know what you're doing, nothing's happened, nothing's improved, etc., etc. So at that point, we really moved quite fast, and I'll talk about that, into implementation, and then had collaboration as a support structure rather than a lead-in. So it morphed, the whole approach morphed as we moved into the project. There were so many meetings with lots of people in them. And everything, by the way, in New Brunswick, they have duality, which means everything has to be in French and English. By law, everything. That's not multilingual, or it is by law. So whenever I spoke anywhere, there had to be someone doing simultaneous translation of everything I said. Every document we did had to be in English and French. So there was an interesting additional challenge we had. Their payroll, for example, was French and English. We were talking about that last night. You had French bus drivers, you had English bus drivers on different payrolls. It was fascinating stuff. I digress. And in the planning and design, so we did, again, there's a lot more to it than this, but we really understood how processes work today, what the requirements for the processes were, and critically what the pain points were. We ran a whole bunch of workshops. When I say we, I mean the extended project team. It was well-resourced. This team was very well-resourced by GNB, very well-resourced. And I don't know what the ratio between Chazey and GNB, but it was probably 1 to 5 or 1 to 6. I mean, there were a lot more in terms of the project team. And then you had these subject matter experts, and I think we actually calculated it once. There was dozens and dozens and dozens of people at GNB involved in this initiative. Very, very significant reason why it's successful. And then we moved into 2B process, classic stuff. I'm sure that you understand the process there. This is important, and Monica touched on this. When the new agency, it's called the New Brunswick Internal Services Agency, okay? The New Brunswick Internal Services Agency. When it was first set up as a Crown agency, which means it was protected under the law. It was not set up as a Department of Government. It was set up as a completely independent, in the private sector world, completely independent legal entity with its own rules, regulations, budgets, hiring practices, collective bargaining agreements, everything. Ability to raise capital, completely independent. Why did they do that? I tell you, they did it to make sure that it could, and the expression I've used is to do something different, you need to do something different. And actually setting up the agency meant this is not the same way it's always been done before. This is new, this is shiny. People coming in are going to be trained, they're going to be service orientated. And again, in the partnership meeting yesterday, you heard me get a little bit passionate, for those of you who were there, about the customer bit of that discussion yesterday. This was fundamentally important to the success of this agency, was the customer element, what we call the client interaction framework. And I was talking again with Monica last night, and she was telling me what's been happening on that week, CRM, as it was called there, over the last few years. Very, very important. All right. Technology, not a lot on this slide. Guess why? Because there wasn't a lot of technology. There was an existing Oracle platform, and there was a decision, I was on a steering committee review, to potentially look at implementing a new ERP. So we had Oracle in, we had SAP in, we had some other people in. But the decision was ultimately made not to replace the existing technology, but to leverage it. So there was some work done on that technology. It was ultimately upgraded to R12, right? R12, yes. And then we got certain additional technology enablement, like document management, workflow, IT help desk, and of course the data center migration. The New Brunswick migrated from, we're not too sure if it was 16 or 14 when we were chatting last night, but we think it's from 14 data centers to 2 as part of this initiative. That's a big deal, right? And that was one of the initiatives under this thing. But did we implement a brand new ERP to do this? No. Did we leverage an existing ERP? Yes. Did we then leverage and use the ability and the processes to help with the upgrade that subsequently followed? Yes. Did we renegotiate licenses with Oracle? Yes. So there's a lot of technology stuff that went on, but it wasn't the be-all and end-all. The real enablers from a shared services perspective were the document management and workflow, quite frankly, for this. And there was a lot of manual stuff. And again, Monica and I were talking last night. She is, even today, still running 3 legacy, old-school payroll systems. Nothing, no Oracle, nothing. They are, in fact, one of the goals of implementing shared service at the time was to get off one of those payroll systems. She's still on it. Mm. But they have driven significant process improvements, significant standardization, significant KPIs, metrics, and improvements in process. And again, chatting with Monica, it was great catching up last night. The original target for saving efficiency and monetization, efficiency is one thing, monetization is another. Haven't we heard that recently as well here in Washington, right? Efficiency, what does that mean? How do you monetize that? So you need to think about budget. And anyway, Monica's target was 25% efficiency that had to roll through the budget. And it did. And I think you ultimately achieved 35% during this first wave. So that's pretty significant stuff, given that lack of technology. But there was so much that was done. I know Monica was reminding me again last night that actually she was very implicitly involved in designing this. Once we decided to go, it went fast. You see these timelines? 1st of April, 15th of June, 7th of September. This is all the same year, by the way. This isn't a 15-year rollout plan. This is what we called a rolling wave deployment. And you have the departments all on the left-hand side here. And then you have the three main functions, payroll and benefits, payable, and service desk on here. And you can see we started slow and then we accelerated and started going really fast. So we started slow and then we started going really fast. And this was how it was done. And this last slide on the project side of things was basically, some of it was lift and shift, right? I mean, I get asked this question all the time. Is it lift and shift? Is it optimize and move? Or is it big bang? Or is it some hybrid of that? Well, the answer is it's always some hybrid of that. But the extent to which it's lift and shift versus optimize depends largely on your technology, depends on your goals, your timelines, your existing footprint, etc. So what we did here, there was elements of lift and shift, but then after 6 months of the shared service center being live, we then really started drive continual process improvement. 6 months of, when I say go live, so it wasn't at the end of the project, we were still deploying, right? 6 months, we had a load of project meetings. We looked at shadow organizations. We were talking about that the other day, shadow organizations. What does that mean? It's where you hand over a bunch of stuff from the previous organization, you move it into the shared service center, and everybody in the old organization carries on doing exactly what they did before. That's a problem. So we were driving out some of those shadow organizations through this process. Okay, so with that, lessons learned. How am I doing for time, Robert? Okay, great. No. On lessons learned, there's a few there. I'm going to sort of, as I say, you're going to get the slides. Process versus customer. It's very easy to become customer. We're going to provide this service for this customer, and you end up just doing the same as you always did before, but from a central, and you don't really think about end-to-end process. The truth is, there was a mix. There were certain areas where we still had to, even though we moved people from out in the province, multiple locations into the centre, there was still some element of dedicated customer support. But over time, and again, Monica was explaining to me last night, she's really defunctionalizing, decustomer focusing payroll now after rolling in much more than when we did it. I mean, how many people are there now at MBISA or at SNB?
2,300.
2,300. When we finished in 2012, there were 338. So you can see how they've continued that process. And they've done it through thinking more about end-to-end process and less about specific customer, in other words. I remember one of the challenges we had actually was, of course, guess what? Data privacy and security, right? So on the service desk, when we moved some people into the center, they literally had to sort of cordon them off from everybody else for a while to make sure there was no breach of data privacy and we had access rights. Okay, I remember all those discussions been extremely intense. Very intense. So we had to do that initially, but over time that you work out how to move those processes out, how to share the service provision, etc. That was one of the lessons learned. Site selection, I won't go on about this too much, but the centre, the location, there was a brand new location in Fredericton. Fredericton is the capital of New Brunswick. And the location was a place called Brookside Mall. It's a fantastic shared services location. If you ever get the chance to go and see this location, I would strongly recommend it. It follows all the best practices of open space, of work environment, of light, of air, of facilities, of cafes, everything great. And again, Monica was telling me last night, that model has now been leveraged throughout the province, throughout SNB, because it was so successful. The one little story I want to tell you is that site, before MBISA took it, used to be a call centre for Sendon, for those of you who remember Sendon, the call centre. So I used to get taxis from the airport. Fredericton is always not the easiest place to get to. And when I used to get there, I used to get the taxi and the taxi drivers, and I'd say, I'd like to go to Brookside Place, please. And they say to me, do you mean the call centre? And I used to say, no, I do not mean the call centre. I mean NBISA, the Shared Services Centre. And that was part of the change management, because the taxi drivers told everybody that. So as soon as you started putting it in, it was important. And on top of that, we had lots of customer service training, lots of effective technology training. We were chatting last night about some of the quick wins and training tools we put in place to help with that. Politics and hierarchy, that's not important, is it? The key thing there was, of course, there was lots of that, but it was about trying to work out the best. This isn't rocket science, but it's not easy, right? It's about how to work the best channels. I mean, Dave Ferguson, this gentleman I mentioned, he retired. A new clerk to Executive Council came in, whose name escapes me right now. Then you had to work out how you're going to, work with that gentleman. And then you had the different organisations. So you were constantly working through those areas. Change in scope. We had lots of changes in scope for this project. Don't be afraid of it. Some of the projects, and this isn't a public sector statement, when I get it in the private sector, we roll out shared services and they say, oh, we've got to nail down scope and it's got to be, the project plan has got to be 100% accurate. Well, yeah, okay. But you've got to be flexible, because you're going to find a bunch of stuff when you start rolling this out. And what are you going to do? If you stick to your scope, you're going to have to put the rock back down that you've just picked up, or you're going to miss an opportunity, or you're going to fail on your business case. So you need to think about scope. FTE, part-time equivalence, is a huge deal. I won't talk about it today, but it was part of the challenge of working out how the activities that were going to be handed over. And management functions was another area I won't go into, but you can read it. Yes, this was an interesting one. Maintenance of legacy channels of communication. So a lot of staff were brought in. By the way, there was a specific statement made, for those of you that might be thinking, ask this question, and I'm not saying it was the right, wrong, or indifferent, but it was a statement made, no layoffs, right? So it was explicitly made, no one was going to be laid off. So what did that mean? Well, one, it meant there were no layoffs, right? But secondly, it meant, okay, how are we going to, two things it meant. That meant we were going to use existing staff. Now, there are pros of that, and there are cons of that, right? You know what I mean? They might not be the right people. They might not want to come across. They might not be the best performers, all this sort of stuff. So there's a pro and there's a con. The pro is they know how things get done. They work in the government. They know people. They've got good connections. They know the technology. And, of course, there are some good people as well. So that's one of the pros and the cons of there. But we had some people come over who gave their personal phone numbers out. So the old customers were still phoning them on their cell phones and stuff, and we had to force them back through the new channels to connect with the shared service centre. So that was just one of the other lessons learned. Leadership, it goes without saying, right? If you don't have some leadership, you're going to fail. Another person said to me the other day, as a private sector client, they said, oh, we need to get, we've got 100% buy-in for this in EMEA, in Europe. I said, not a chance if you got 100% buy-in. And I said, I was in EMEA 2 weeks ago. I think at least 50% of those people can't stand this, what we're trying to do here. They just nod in their heads when you're talking about it. The point is there's always going to be people who don't want to do it. Just recognize that. And then the leadership is really important to force through that. And the goal should be that by the time you've actually implemented, you've moved many of those naysayers, what I call the middle third, the healthy skeptics I call them, into being supporters and proponents. That's important. And driving engagement. The point about that last one is change is one thing. Change management, we used to call it the 3 C's of change management. Do you remember that? It was communication, consultation, and collaboration. Then I started working at the universities, and we added a 4th called consensus, which means nothing ever gets done, because everybody has to say something. So that's what consensus means. You have to get agreement from everybody. So one thing the university systems are doing is they're moving more to a collaborative framework to get stuff done. Because if you can't get consent, you can never please everybody. But anyway, we used the 3 at New Brunswick. It worked really well. Are we communicating here? Are we consulting, which means we own the decision, but we're asking for input? Or are we collaborating, which means we get into a room with a group of people, we don't own the decision, but the majority rules, which is not the same as consensus, where everybody has to agree. So anyway, interesting. So what happened? I'm nearly there, Robert. I know you're sort of... nearly there. So in terms of the achievement, so what did we achieve? All right, a lot of KPIs, measures and metrics we put in, I mean, Monica's team, fantastic measures and metrics. A lot of them didn't exist before. So we put them in. So do we have a baseline? Sometimes no. So when people were saying, you suck, you're much worse than you used to be, well, first thing we'd say is, well, we're measuring now, so we can start to prove that. And secondly, we'd ask them, can you prove how good you were before? I mean, I actually wrote an AP paper. I can remember that paper on accounts payable because everyone was telling us how terrible this was going to be. And we wrote a white paper on how awful it was already. Out as it was, the control weaknesses, the payment for errors, the lack of discounts, etc. I said, let's recognize that we're improving stuff, everyone. And then let's work out how we're going to put a metrics measure framework in place to prove it. And I've done that. Again, I'm looking at some of the data, listen to it, it's great. Some of the other benefits, of course, economies of scale, which have been leveraged since that Monica's going to talk about for a couple of minutes. Staff development and career advancement. You often hear, oh, this shared services thing, how are you going to empower people and engage people? Isn't it a terrible thing to work in a shared service centre? Well, if you want it to be, but if you don't want it to be, it can be one of the most engaging, empowering experiences for anybody. There's lots of opportunity in shared service. There's customer interaction, there's technology, there's continuous process improvement. There's tremendous opportunity, and that's been proved again, talking to Monica, what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. Money. How much was saved? When we left in 2012, we were on the run rate for saving $8.8 million annually of in-scope processes, which was well on the target we looked in. Monica will touch on a different target in a second, which they've gone through. My last slide. This is when I first came into New Brunswick. They had this. I've seen these. Some of the clearing does this sort of stuff. They had one of these slides on the wall in the centre, and this was the journey. And I think, Monica, you still have this.
I do.
Yeah.
It's a 3 foot by 6 foot long map, if you will. And we started in the early days. We had to have a vision, and we worked with someone that came up and bang on. I think we can walk through, and I won't take you today, but we can show you where everything that we've done leading to the shared services.
All right. With that, I'm going to stop talking and hand over to Monica, who's just going to talk about what's happened in the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years.
Sure. I'm just keeping an eye on Robert there. He's going to give me the clue. So really where we are now is we have a vision to become a world-class model for government shared services. Really important. Service New Brunswick, the old Service New Brunswick had a world-class model for citizens facing, and now we're looking at the whole piece. So looking at how we get there, what we need to do, and really excited. It's been quite a journey the last 18 months, but we're certainly moving in that direction. As Phil indicated in one of the earlier slides, we originally were mandated with 21. Have a look at these 21, and what we have left highlighted is what we've not done. Facility management, though, is centralized, and I really don't like that word. I know, Phil, we spent a lot of time. It is under the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. That's all the facilities, so outside our scope. And the last 5 that are there, as we move forward, we've just recently received funding to start the ERP purchasing process, and they'll be moving through. So we're really hopeful by the end that we'll be in a much better spot.
It's really quite funny because those things on the bottom right, you see their accounts receivable, fixed assets, and general accounting. They're often one of the first that go in a shared services organisation. We were chatting about actually with a gentleman from the Veterans Affairs earlier. Finance is often the ones that goes first. This is sort of left alone here. Whatever.
Yeah.
Of course, different reasons for different reasons.
Yeah, and part of it is we still have the Oracle financials that we're working through, but there are components there. So internal services, so into government, we've got the IT, the human resources, payroll and benefits, the accounts payable, and then you can see the list goes on. With the addition of the health services, shared services, we've taken on things like laundry and linen. So our worlds are a little bit different because we talk different language, but the VP of Health Services really is passionate about laundry and linen and how much we do in pounds that we move through. Really want to be on the external side. We're a one-stop shop, service delivery, service centers, teleservices, digital services. We have property assessment, residential tenancy services, and then various registry services. So again, that's outward facing to the taxpayer of New Brunswick, but we're trying to do it so it's one looking out to clients and internal to clients. So a little bit about us. We touched on it basically. We are a Crown Corporation with a board of directors. We have 2,300 staff across the province. not without its challenge. We are very much an urban-rural. We've got 3 major cities, 3 smaller cities, and quite desperate. I can tell you from my own perspective, I have staff out in the regions. It is hard. Being in a shared services center together does give you some economies of scale and just a feeling of belonging. That's one of my lessons learned is folks out and about. We have an operating budget of $275 million. And again, just listening through, we have more than 400 distinct services that we provide to our taxpayers. We have back office. We're about 83% overall client satisfaction. Obviously, we like to drive that a little bit higher, and we're working towards that. We've saved almost $100 million in strategic procurement. I was having a chat with someone earlier saying, you know, everybody used to do their own thing, and now bringing it together, we're really driving out the savings. Would be remiss if we didn't talk about the 22 million pounds of laundry that we process for the hospitals. David Dumont would be very happy with me. And Phil touched on the translation. So we are Canada's only officially bilingual province. English and French, there is a sense of duality, but we translate a lot. But we brought that into our shared services because now we're offering services to the municipalities around the province. And in conjunction, we also service 22,000 desktops and laptops. Our focus is customer service, primary goal, whether it's internal or external. We're looking at productivity, continuous process improvement. I mean, we did process improvement, but for me, the word continuous, you're always driving to find the next thing. We're standardization and elimination of duplication. I know for my service, it was incredible. We used to use 34 different forms. We're down to 3. You know, just everybody sending things in differently. You couldn't train people. We're innovative. We're always looking for that next stage. And we have an incredible group of employees. Dedicated, as Phil said, not everybody wants to be there still, 7 years out, but we're really well supported. Everybody understands that there is a place to go and such, and we're in it together. And we measure and report. So we do our KPIs, our key performance indicators. Quarterly, I send out stats to my client groups, and we meet, and we're pretty well always at the same level, but it doesn't mean that we're not wanting to drive a little bit further. Our challenges, unlike anybody else. In ERP, we're still working on legacy systems. One of our payroll systems still works on Windows 98 using DBase, so think about that. We pay 17,000 school district employees, and we can't even put them in through the firewall. So we're really big on trying to get this ERP up and running 3 payroll systems is not much fun, I can tell you that. IT infrastructure, solutions, we've got really aggressive savings targets. Our shrinking workforce, there's been a lot of people leave, and it's slowing down, but it's still very much in our forefront. We have a lot of large priority initiatives, and everybody looks to us. The departments, you know, you have the naysayers, ones that are waiting for you to succeed, and others that may not. And then we know there's a big impact on change in a lot of our employees. You know, I used to be in a department, I used to go to lunch with Susie every Thursday, and now you've moved me to this place that I can't go. So it's all those little things that add up. But we have some terrific best practices. We've got the Bounce scorecard methodology that we're using. We're big into Lean Six Sigma, the client or the customer relationship management, employee engagement, project management, and benchmarking. So we're working through all those, and the hope is we've brought the 3 entities together that we will develop further. That's it for me.
And the savings number, did we take that out?
I don't know the savings number. So we had 30 million.
So remember that $8.8 million number, the target, and they're on the way to achieving it, is now $30 million. So hopefully you can see from this, I mean, I tell you it wasn't easy, but it was fun. It really was. I mean, we had some crazy moments on this project. 1 or 2 glasses of wine occasionally as well.
Occasionally.
But there were moments of mayhem, but there were moments of major breakthrough and excitement as well. And you can see that momentum, once you got going, really started to happen. And what really makes me proud, honestly, 1, that I was associated with this, 2, that I worked with the likes of Monica and the team at GMB, and 3, to listen to Monica last night telling me what they've done in the last 3 years. This thing didn't just stop, which sometimes happens with these things. It's continued, and I was really, really pleased to hear that. Yeah. So I don't know if we've got any time for a question or 2, have we, Robert? If anyone has a comment or a question they'd like to throw out straight away, for Monica specifically, please, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the
Yes.
So it's a public-private institution?
No, it's a public, very much. It's not private, but we can regenerate our revenues. So as the revenues come in,
So do you have private sector investment partners? Where are you getting the money from?
we get it from government, and then any services that we sell. So for example, I brought in some entities, some what we call Part 4 Crown corporations, and I charge them for payroll services.
So there's no partnership in terms of the funding there, Tim, but they do obviously partner with a bunch of external vendors, for example, things like ERP and facilities management and the help desk and things like that. They do that, a lot of that within that structure.
As I said, so when you first started this, what was the true executive force of the change? In the federal government, you need that top level, C-level executive.
And we certainly had support at the very top. Dave Ferguson, who was at the time the clerk, I remember in 1998 going on my first shared services conference. He was a proponent from way back. And he was very supportive, had the ear, and we had a very committed group of deputy ministers that were really supportive of the shared services advisory.
And to be honest with you, the Prime Minister.
The Premier.
The Premier, excuse me, what was his name again, the Liberal Premier?
Oh, Sean Graham. Sorry,
Yeah, he was very pro. He used to come to the Shared Service Centre and do speeches and introduce people. So it was political and civil servant support, which to answer your question.
Were the deputy ministers political or those civil servants?
They are appointed at the pleasure of the Premier, but they are civil servants.
Okay.
So.
They can span
Yes.
an administration?
Yes. Oh, very much so. Yes. Yes, very much so.
Champions.
There are a few probably. Okay.
Over here.
Push here, is that it? Okay.
Great.
So you had a no layoff policy. You must have had a lot of redeployment. How did you set the standards for redeployment, and did you end up being able to measure any value added as a result of the redeployments?
So we had a no layoff, no relocation. So that was a challenge. And we work closely with our unions. We have, 20 different collective agreements that we administer. We reduced by attrition. I'll tell you, the no layoff policy was a bit problematic. We didn't get all the high flyers. You weren't allowed to pick for your organization, right? You got who you received. But through attrition, we were able to reduce the numbers. And some people moved on to other things. It wasn't for them, and they were able to find other work.
And actually, one of the initial drivers, if you remember, was the demographics. They had a whole bunch of people they knew were leaving through retirement, and that was one of the initial drivers. The no layoff policy was helped and it hindered as well, which is not a surprise, right? And there were also a bunch of contractors who were, they didn't fall under the no layoff policy.
Hi, Mark Wine, Department of Veterans Affairs. Question on the human resources factor. As shared services as a program, as an initiative began, and people in the organizations started to hear about it or get wind that something was up, transformative, I hope. How were communications with the workforce managed?
So we really did a lot of work with the workforce. I mean, and there was a lot of nervousness, if you will. But one of the things we did early on, and I was heavily involved, was we actually engaged the unions and brought them in, showed them what we wanted to do, how we wanted to do it. And they were very supportive, even to the point where on their webpage, they were like not entertaining grievances or anything like that. So we were very successful. We had good communications, but you can never communicate enough. The Council of Change Agents, which I led, was really, we had people in every department. Some people were there, I think, more for their own purpose, to find out what was going on. But the ones that worked well, the change agents, went back in and were really our messengers. So, but not everybody was happy. I can't stand up here and tell you that everyone was, but those people that weren't moved on. But the reality is, I think, and I can say this, in the payroll community, they finally felt like they had a voice. Like we were one community, not 28 different payroll departments around the province. So.
Hi, my name is Al Sample. I'm with the Program Support Center at Health and Human Services. Can you talk to how you work through the challenges of evolving from an let's say, as-is state to a more standardized shared services footprint?
Sure. So do you want to answer that?
You
or-
go and I can
Okay.
add- I can
Yeah,
add
you
some
can
flavor,
add.
yeah.
So we did the as-is, and although we wanted to capture the sense of as-is, we did the workshops. We knew where we had to go, and part of it was standardization. It was incredible, like I say, and I'm speaking specifically to my service line, how everybody's looking at the same collective agreements and interpreting things differently. So we had to quickly determine how we were going to be in the new world. But it did take a period of time because we did, as Phil said, did a bit of a lift and shift, standardization. Everything happened very quickly, and you saw we had a quick deployment.
In terms of the process, it was, I suppose you call it traditional in that sense. We had as-is workshops. To echo what Monica said, the trouble with as-is workshops, the danger with as-is workshops is you document to death existing processes.
Exactly.
What's the point? Well, there is a point if you're going to follow these same processes. So the lift and shift, you have to do it. But what you're really looking for is requirements, inputs, operations and outputs, and then opportunities to eliminate duplication, handoffs, and pain points. That reminds me of one thing. The spending authority policy there used to drive me nuts. It was the excuse not to do any, you can't do this because the spending authority. And eventually I said, can I see that policy? And we read it, and it was basically said, you can't buy anything without proper approval. So can we please stop calling the spending authority the be-all and end-all for everything? It's just a standard. You can't buy something that's not approved. What we're working on here is how do we buy it and how do we get it approved? So there was all sorts of breakthrough moments like that. But there was as-is workshops, to-be workshops, then what we call CRPs, Conference Room Pilots, where we implemented the technology side of it as well, and then we had deploy. And there were what we call 5 levels of processes. In the business case, it was like 1 level down to level 2. As we went into design and build, it went 3, 4. As we got into deploy, it went 4. And by the time we'd finished, it was level 5, which is desktop procedures. I've said way more than I probably should have done, but that was really the process in doing the process design. And it seemed to work. I think hopefully that answers your question, Al. We're done. Okay, thank you, Monica.
Hang
Thank you
around,
very
yeah.
much for your